Hello and welcome back to the Private Client Podcast. My name is Charlie Shammy. I'm an independent financial advisor and director at Glams IFA and co-founder of the Private Client Network. We're a networking group for private client professionals trying to close the gap between our various professions in order to increase our collective knowledge, improve the service to our clients, and grow our respective businesses. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking to Tara Connor-McLaren, partner in the family team at Thrings Bristol office. Tara, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Charlie.
I was just scrolling through, just before we jumped on, I was scrolling through your LinkedIn profile. So I'm gonna go straight in all the way back to the beginning. Obviously, you studied law, you immediately did the LPC and got a job in a law firm. Did you always want to be a solicitor?
I think it's one of those things that when you're younger, it's quite an obvious option, isn't it? You see all the TV shows, you think, oh, that maybe I could do that. But honestly, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. So my mum, and I think this is a teacher thing, my mum's a teacher, and she just said to me, just do law because it's a good degree to have. So whether you go into it or not, and then things just kind of spiraled from there because then I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I went and did law and then carried on. Then she told me I really should stop listening to my mum. She told me you can't take a gap year because lots of people take a gap year, don't they, after uni, and they do a year and then decide what they'll do. And she said, if you leave studying, you'll never go back. So you just need to go and do your LPC. And I was like, oh, she's probably right. And then that's how I ended up then becoming a lawyer.
It's so good. I mean, law is very, very blessed with it. It's just got a natural attraction. It's a profession that people are aware of from a very young age. It helps there's always like a good, novel or film, with lawyers sort of at the center of it. But I think from a professional point of view, you guys never struggle to attract people into it. But that conversely makes it quite difficult on entry. So I know a number of people who studied law, did an LPC, and then struggled to get a training contract. How did you find that part of the process?
I remember at the time it was so daunting. I don't even think I fully grasped that, when I was in second year of university, that I should have been applying for my training contracts. And then it really did come as a surprise when I finished and I thought, oh, I haven't done that. But I then went and paralegal for a few years. And I think that's probably a route quite a lot of people take now, is they do their law degree, they do their legal exams, well, which is the LPC, but now SQE.
Yeah.
And then they paralegal and then they get a training contract. And actually, I would say the training, being a paralegal first, put me in really good stead for.
Were you doing family law at that point?
No, I never planned on being a family lawyer. So what I had really wanted to do was be a commercial lawyer and then go in-house at a football club. That was really the plan.
Oh.
Because I used to live in Manchester, that's where I did my LPC, and I worked at Old Trafford when I was there because we're big Man United fans. And I thought I applied to do my training contract. Who was the sponsor? Nike was the sponsor of United at the time. And I applied and they actually just never emailed me back. So that was pretty rude. But so that's what I had thought in my mind that I would do commercials, corporate, something like that. But then I did family, and family is something that when you do it, it either captures you or it doesn't. That's how I ended up being a family lawyer.
So was that where you did? So that was where you were paralegaling? Was that in Manchester?
So I started. So I did my LPC in Manchester. And then I worked in Manchester for a year at Hill Dickinson, which I was like a legal assistant there, so similar, I guess. But I worked which was the NHS Litigation Authority, which deals with claims in NHS. And then I moved down to Bristol and paralegaled down here in commercial before I then started my training contract.
Oh, I see. And then so training contract kicks in. How many seats?
I did 3. So family was my was my third seat, and then I stayed. Yeah.
And straight away sort of liked it, thought this is it.
There's a real busyness about family, lots and lots of clients, just all different issues, all different, you do a range of different types of matters. So, children, private, you do finances, and every case has got a quirk to it. So it's really interesting. You're in the office, you're out at court, you're prepping for hearings. It's just quite a varied, I'd say, discipline to be in. And from what I often think about family is from the get-go, you can really get involved. So some teams, so when I was a trainee in insolvency, half the time I was a trainee, I didn't really know what was happening. And you're just trying to get on with things. Whereas with family, you can really hit the ground running, because there's all different types of cases, obviously really complex cases I couldn't have, but there's always a starting point, sorting out, a divorce, a low level finance case. There's those sorts of things you can actually get into really quickly. And I think that's part of it, is you start working. I think as a trainee, and especially in our team, the way it was is that you had worked on files really quickly. You had your own files. It was, whereas I maybe didn't have that in other seats. So I think that part of the attraction was getting involved.
Yeah, it makes sense. So just in case people aren't aware, when we're talking family law, are we talking divorce? Is that the primary activity that you guys are involved in?
Well, I think people would always attribute it to divorce, but actually we do very few divorces, because people can apply online for their divorce, but we do the other elements that flow from that. So the finances on divorce, which is a separate strand to actually the divorce process itself. So we do finances and we do private children. Obviously, other law firms will do public children work, working with local authorities. That's not something we do, but we do private, where you have parents who are trying to reach an agreement on what contact they each should have with their children.
Parents manage to sort of, talking generally, do parents manage to agree that themselves, or do they really fight over access and days? And
yeah, it can really depend. And you have many parents who you might act for them on the finances, but actually on children matters, they can sort that themselves, or they go to mediation, and that's something we really encourage, so that they can try and come to the arrangement themselves. Because with children, the court have a bit of a no order principle, where they want parents to be able to reach an agreement by themselves.
yeah,
Because with children, if you think about it, you need so much flexibility. They're always changing, and ideally, if you can reach agreement between you, that's the best way to do it, really. But with us, then yeah, if they can't reach an agreement, either we'll try and negotiate it for them, we'll send them off to mediation. There's other forms of dispute resolution we can consider, but otherwise, then court proceedings might be required. But that is very much a last resort, especially in children.
this is potentially diving deep into the weeds of a question that I suspect has got a number of answers, but I'm going to go with it. What happens? So say parents come to an agreement on how to split access to kids, and it doesn't pan out as agreed. What do people do? What do people come back to you in that situation and say, look, my ex-partner's not adhering to the agreement? What happens at that point?
Yes, they can come back to us. What we like to do is, for parents, if they do reach an agreement, having a parenting plan. So it's not, it can be a changing document because it may need to change over time, but having something in writing between the parents, even if it's not legally binding as such, is helpful, because it gives each parent then knows what the arrangements are going to be. But if they can't then agree, they'll either have to renegotiate between themselves, go to mediation, come back to us, and we then, yes, have to try and reach another agreement. And so that does happen. It's not unheard of, but we're hoping that once parents have been through it once, that they can try and muddle through, and just try and act in the best interests of the children as to what meets their needs.
Yeah. So if divorce doesn't take up most of your time, where do you find your, if you had to block up your time, what do you spend most of your time doing?
Finances on divorce. So I do
the financial side,
but I do most. Yeah, I would say that. I suppose it changes, but I would say more recently and in recent years, I've had a lot more finances. So I do a lot more finances on divorce, and actually an area in which I probably work a lot more now is with work to do with unmarried couples. So when you're married and you divorce and you have to deal with your finances, we have the Matrimonial Causes Act. And what that does is that sets out what the court need to take into consideration if if the parties are separating, and when it comes to finances, and that's what we're really guided by. Whereas if you are an unmarried couple, you don't have that. And actually, in England and Wales, there are no, laws for cohabiting couples and how they should deal with finances if they are to separate. So I do quite a few settlement agreements. So where parties are unmarried and they want some help trying to reach an agreement in relation to property or other assets. And then, so I spend quite a bit of time on that. And then another extension to that is that sometimes I have unmarried couples who don't agree on how a property should be shared. And I do trust of land and appointment of trustees act work, so TLATA work, which is much more in the civil sphere. But I work with a partner in our property litigation team, and we run those files because sometimes court proceedings are required, and that isn't in the family court. So yeah, so that's a real growing area, especially for my team. So we do quite a bit of that work, but I feel like you can't move for it. There's so many unmarried couples that I think when I came back, so I'm only not long back from mat leave, when I came back, like my first week, there was like 3 new instructions on unmarried couples, and you don't know at the beginning if that's just going to be a separation agreement or end up in TLATA proceedings. Luckily, not that many end up in TLATA proceedings, but I have had a few, and that they are expensive and long running.
What's the grounds? I mean, if unmarried, if there isn't sort of binding legal precedent set for unmarried couples, what's the basis of the agreement? Because if assets aren't distributed equally, which let's assume they're not, is it just, on what, how do you make the case, I suppose I'm asking?
Yeah, well, it isn't really as much a legal basis. So with the property, that's pretty clear because we follow what the Trust of Land Appointment of Trustees Act says and what case law says about property. So that's what drives that section. But I do also have, couples who, well, I'll represent one of them who comes and they've been together for a long time. They have children. So for them, it's not just strictly about what the law says. It's about what they think is fair and reasonable in the circumstances. They don't know what their rights are. Is there any, because if you're unmarried, there isn't claims on pensions and there isn't claims on income. You're really dealing with the property, whether that's jointly owned or solely owned, and it gets quite intricate, but what the agreements were. So you're right that in some ways, and some clients will be happy to find out that actually, well, they can't claim on your pension and they can't claim spousal maintenance. But for others, they actually just want to reach an agreement that suits everybody. Because they're a family unit at the end of the day. So whether they're married or not, there are many reasonable people out there who want to make sure that everyone is provided for adequately, especially if they've been married for a long time.
Well, that's good. That's good. I mean, that's certainly what you'd hope. And how would that differ? So in the case of unmarried, how would that differ to a case of a married couple? What's that process? Is it very different?
Oh, completely. Well, with a married couple, you have a proper process. So, if you can't reach an agreement together or through solicitors or mediation, then you have the court process. But if you're an unmarried couple, you don't have any of that. So everything is by agreement, apart from the property. So when there's a jointly owned property or property owned in one person's name, but the other partner has a claim on it, that's TLATA proceedings, so in the civil court. But you don't have claims in the family court if you are a cohabiting couple. So if you decide that you don't want to share income or share any capital, then that isn't an opportunity for unmarried couples, and also for unmarried couples with pensions. So if you're married, the court can make a pension sharing order, but that there isn't the equivalent if you're unmarried. So actually you miss out on pensions. That's not something you can obviously try and negotiate an agreement that takes that into account, but the court won't do a pension sharing order for an unmarried couple.
Yeah, I see. It's interesting. It's often where we'll pick up clients following a divorce, and it's usually around the pension where they get the pension sharing order issued, and typically it requires them to open a personal pension that the proceeds can be transferred to, and we often get contacted in that moment. It is possible, generally speaking, it depends. I suppose it depends on the details. Advisors can often retain both of a divorcing couple, but sometimes I think they just don't want to. And particularly if it's sort of the gentleman has had the advisor relationship prior, often the sort of
Yeah.
ex-wife will very much see an advisor as their husband's and maybe wants to do their own thing. And we often get involved at that stage. And it can be difficult because I think I said this on a previous podcast. It's depending on how the marital assets were acquired and over what length of time, it can be quite a jarring experience to suddenly come into a lot of money that you haven't personally been managing. And you definitely have to treat that, you sort of need to take extra care at that point.
Oh, definitely. Well, first, just to say on that is that it's also for us is that what can happen is a client comes to us and either they have the relationship with their financial advisor or their partner, their wife or their husband does. And if you are the one who wants the information, but your client isn't the one who has the relationship, then it's always tricky because you know that that financial advisor has all the information you need. But you
Yeah.
have to be so cautious because the relationship is actually with husband or wife and you act for the other party. So we see it on the flip side of that. And then we're, regularly, almost, at the outset, we are saying to most of our clients, that they need to obtain financial advice. And I suppose lots of those people have financial advisors, or you're right, ones who have shared a financial advisor then need to get their own new financial advisor. So that does arise. And I think it arises in relation to financial advice. It arises in relation to mortgages as well. So mortgage capacity advice, and that's something now that, especially with the courts, that they want. What used to happen years ago is people would just go on to Nationwide and do a quick calculation and see what it was worth. But really, what we want to see is how much you can borrow, what information that's based on, what you're saying your income is, what your monthly repayments are going to be. So that information is really important as well, and that's something. Well, some financial advisors do mortgages too, don't they? But it's more, I think mostly now I see it separate, would you say?
Yeah, it's a mix. I actually don't know the split. There's a lot of advisors that do. If I had to guess, I'd say more advisors don't do mortgages. I think historically they did,
Yeah,
but I think just they've moved more into pensions, investments, and savings. It's certainly the majority. We do mortgages, but it's less than 5% of the business. It really is a much
yeah,
smaller part, and
yeah.
it tends to be existing clients who we just deal with everything anyway. We've got copies of their pay slips and we know what they're earning and assets that they hold. So I think often for them, it's easy to say, look, my mortgage is up for renewal. Can you sort it? In which case we will. It tends
Mm,
not to be a sort of larger part of new clients we take on. Although it does still happen. Again,
yeah,
coming back to the divorce thing, often around that, when it's sort of the linchpin, because what whichever sort of spouse doesn't retain the family home, assuming that one does,
mm.
what that spouse can then get mortgage wise, I mean, it's kind of integral to the whole financial
Oh,
outcomes. Like
absolutely. Oh,
sort of approaching into
definitely.
your area a bit, but if you can't afford to buy the other person out, I mean, it's
Mm.
quite a
And
quite
not,
a,
and I suppose it brings up other things of whether they even want to buy each other out, doesn't it? Because, not everyone wants to keep the family home, or sometimes everyone wants to keep the family home, and then that's always a tricky one
yeah.
when everyone wants to keep it. But do you think then your work has increased more in pensions? Is that?
Yeah, pensions. I think the whole world around pensions has changed enormously.
Oh, it's
Since
massive. Yeah.
in 2015 there was a rule change. It was called pension freedoms, and basically it meant that pensions could be held as invested assets beyond the retirement age, and there was so many implications for that. It meant pensions start to be looked at differently. Often people would start focusing on passing assets down through their pensions from an IHT point of view. So yeah, pensions is huge. And often with clients, whichever sort of stage of the journey we take them on, um, and whichever sort of wherever they are financially in life, clients usually everything they want to know boils down to a single question, and they'll phrase it in different ways, but it's sort of, will we be okay, is
Mm,
what it all boils down
yeah.
to. And what that tends to mean is later in life, will we
Yeah.
be okay? Do we have enough? How much income will we have in retirement? and pensions just form the lion's share of the answer to that question.
Yeah.
So I think just by extension, pensions is a focus for a lot of advisors.
It's interesting actually, because in divorces, not always, but regularly, you get some parties who are less concerned about pensions. They're concerned about the capital now. They want it now. And so you'll probably already know, but when we instruct a pension and divorce expert, often we'll get offsetting calculations because people want to get as much capital now and worry about their pensions later on, which is quite interesting because obviously
I wonder if that will change. You see, because I think the sort of the wider industry's kind of cottoned onto the fact that, okay, let's talk about the cliche that in a divorcing couple, the wife has a preference to keep the house and are willing to forgo large pension assets to do that, I think that's the historical way that used to work out. But then, fast forward 10 years, suddenly those pension assets that they gave up are suddenly they look awfully valuable when retirement approaches. But I think that industry media, industry press is on this a lot. And I think it's, and to be honest, it's probably come from solicitors as well. I think from your point of view, I think solicitors highlight this much more prominently than historically they did, of like, no, do not ignore these pension assets.
Yeah, we actually have a case not that long ago, and one party not interested in the pension, and this pension was big. And I thought, and even when they know that, I just thought, obviously we advised accordingly, but yeah, it does happen where people just, I suppose they just don't see it as something now, they see it as something later. And not everyone values or appreciates how much long-term planning is necessary.
Deferred gratification. I'm trying to teach my 4-year-old about this at the moment.
Oh,
one sweet now or 3
even.
sweets tomorrow.
Oh, it's always one sweet now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there is nothing. Yeah, that is not. Yeah, my 3-year-old, almost 4-year-old, will pretty much the same.
Sorry, I skipping about a bit, but so you did that initial seat, or when you were doing the corporate stuff, and then you went into family, and it's completely different. Dealing with corporates and dealing with individuals, it is very, very different. I had a very similar experience. I was at an investment bank prior, dealing with institutional investors, and then I started doing private clients and retail, and to start with, I found it really hard. I found the emotional side of it really difficult. I think I wasn't quite prepared for it. But then ironically, it became a really positive. And now I'd say dealing with individuals is probably the best bit about the job and the thing that I like the most. Did you have something similar, or did you take to it straight away?
So I think I always liked dealing with people. So I would say the best job I ever had was being a waitress. I just really liked that job. And I always liked dealing with people. And then when you come into family, you're right, you're dealing with people all day, every day, telephone calls nonstop, emails nonstop. And I like that. And I think with the family element, because I'm sure you hear it all the time, whenever we go to events, whenever we're talking internally, some of my colleagues that say, we don't know how you do it. And I think people say that to family lawyers all the time.
Yeah.
But I think I've always thought of it that whilst you always want to do the best for your clients, but I don't take that emotional element home. And
that's
it's hard
because that would be really tough.
Yeah, I think there's the odd case where there's something in it that really you think, oh, it sticks with you. But I think for most cases, your focus is on, getting the best outcome, sorting everything out, trying to resolve it, rather than rather than getting down about what's happened, because we see what's happened. Those sorts of things happen all the time. That's our day to day. That's every client. There's an issue that needs resolved. So I wonder if well, for you, it probably is always more positive. For us, we meet people at what is arguably the worst time of their lives, and it's about trying to get them through that. But I try and probably focus more on the problem solving aspect and there's people now who help with the emotional side of things. So, we have much more divorce coaches. People are much more open to go counselling. I just feel like maybe as a generation, there's been a change. in how people approach and look after their well-being and their mental health. And I think that probably helps in family cases.
Do cases, this is maybe the wrong way to put it, but is there a bit of a journey to go on? Because obviously I imagine when you're first engaged by a client, it is extremely heightened emotions. They have to explain the history and what's gone on.
Oh, yeah.
But do cases end positively? Is there do they always end with, I don't know, maybe relief that a resolution has finally arrived at? So does that make it a bit easier, the fact that you get them hopefully to a better place by the end than they were on the day they arrived?
Definitely. Otherwise, I don't think I could do this job because you have to have that. And I think for them is that, especially I always think about finances or even with children. In other areas of law, when you have court cases, for example, there's winners and losers. And there isn't really that in family because, when on finances, which is you have a certain amount of money in a pot and that has sustained one family unit. And then that becomes two family units and you have to share that. So there's no winners in that. It's, you just have to make out of it what you can and what makes the most sense and what's the most reasonable and fair in the circumstances. So by the end of it, people some people are elated. But I think more generally, it's the finality that they can now put that to bed. They can move forward with their lives. They can rebuild. They don't have to worry about things that are unresolved. And so, yeah, I think I would say that's probably the emotion that people probably mostly feel, relief and happiness that they can, and just a sense of freedom. Actually, I think it's probably.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
I could see that. With work changing, because the cliche about who in a couple holds the assets, it really is changing. Like generationally, the under 40s or even under 50s, there is far more parity of income between a married couple than there was historically. Maybe not huge gaps out of the workforce. Is it easier when there's parity in income terms?
Well, I suppose
or assets generally. Does that make it easier?
Well, what makes it the easiest is when there's lots of assets because there's enough for
someone else said
everybody.
that.
So when people talk about cases, because obviously we do all a different range, and I'll come back to that point, I won't miss it, but we do a range of cases, and you get cases, and the hardest cases actually are the cases where there isn't enough. And that's the most difficult because how do you divide what already isn't enough? And that's when difficult decisions have to be made.
Yeah.
But in terms of when there's parity, yeah, that takes, I suppose, in many ways, that takes some of the questions out of it because, spousal maintenance, for example, well, if they both earn the same, then arguably, do they need additional? Now, obviously, there'll be other factors that influence that. So what are the needs of the parties? What capital do they have? So what are their outgoings? I'm thinking in terms of mortgages, children,
Sure.
so there are other things that would influence it. But as a general point, yes, if they have similar incomes, then when it comes to talking about spousal maintenance, it's probably less important than if there's a big disparity in income.
Also, if people have got similar incomes, the majority of pension assets are accumulated through workplace pensions. And if you are on, I mean, it's not always the same because there is a difference between how generous some firms are versus others. But I imagine if there's parity or close to parity on income, then there's probably closer to parity on pension assets as well.
Yeah, that is true. But it also just depends on, when they all the other contributing factors of time out and when they started and things like that. But yeah, absolutely. And to be fair, in those type of relationships, you might be more likely to see that they both bought the house together. So they have similar, the equity could be shared. Then they have similar mortgage capacities. So actually what they can then go on and buy is very similar in nature as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we skipped over it slightly, but just quickly going back to the getting into law and the application process and everything, because there is so many people who just don't end up getting those training contracts. Do you have any advice for anyone sort of in that position? Maybe they have graduated and they're doing the LPC or whatever the equivalent is now on the training contract application process.
Well, I think a couple of things I would say is that you want to get experience. So get a job in a law firm, get a job wherever they have it in the law firm.
Yeah.
And then you can start from, if you get a paralegal job, brilliant. If you don't get that, why not a legal secretary job and then show your interest in, a paralegal job if, obviously those jobs are available. Then in terms of options is that it's not just about a training contract anymore. So people go
Yeah, this is
through,
where I'm out of date. So what
yeah,
happens now? What are the routes?
yeah. So the training contract is an option as well. Don't I'm not an authority on this, but I only know because we now do the apprenticeship scheme. And
Okay.
I know other law firms do that. And the apprenticeship scheme is where you don't, well, they will still do what's called the SQE, but they won't do a training contract. So they'll actually do it at Thrings, they'll do it in one seat. So you won't necessarily try different areas. But for example, if a paralegal joined our team, we have a paralegal at the minute who joined our team and wants to qualify into family, and she's now doing the apprenticeship scheme. So that's an option for people to do. And also you have the legal exec route. And so we again have in our team Amy, who started as a legal secretary, is now a paralegal, is going through the legal exec course, and ultimately at the end she can become a chartered legal executive, or I know some people do, you can do like some sort of cross qualified to be a solicitor, but in my view, once you're a chartered legal exec being a solicitor, it's the same thing.
It's so interesting because obviously university costs have gone up so much, but so many, if you don't need a law degree to get into law, and like lots of the sort of big accounting and consultancy firms
Yes,
are
yes.
removing degrees as a requirement for application. It's really, I mean, because when I graduated in the sort of the mid 2000s, it was just absolutely a prerequisite for all of these jobs. Like,
Oh, absolutely. And do you know what? If I went back, because I always liked working. That's why I did. Like when I was at school, I didn't really like, not that I liked being at school, but I wasn't really that as keen on the academia side at the time. And when I went to university, it was just because people went to university. If there had been sort of apprenticeships that you can go into straight from school to do something like law, I absolutely would have done that. Obviously, you don't want to miss out on the good time we all had at university,
yeah,
but at the same time, I think it's amazing. And obviously, I think where it helps more is diversity, because in law, that's something that is not, we're not quite there yet. And I think that firms are trying, but actually, big changes like having apprenticeships are
they take
probably
time.
going, yeah, they take time, but they're also probably going to be a better way to make law more accessible, because the only way you can encourage diversity prior to apprenticeships would be people who went to university, but you want to capture all the bright people who didn't go to university for whatever reason, because there's so many barriers for people to attend university. And actually, apprenticeships are one of the ways to overcome that. But a lot of it is your right time. And also, it's going to take a lot of promotion, because how do you get the information to the people who you know need it? So I think that will be nice as well for law. Like I think law is changing and there is more diversity, but I think there's a long way to go.
Yeah,
Like everywhere.
I think you're right, but the direction of travel, I think, seems to be in the right
Oh,
direction.
yes, yes, definitely.
One thing I wanted to finish on, and this is something you've mentioned to me previously, there seems to be, and I think it's really positive, there seems to be a bit of a movement in family law towards more amicable agreements and mediation. Tell me a little bit about that. How do you
Yeah,
avoid the contentious side of it?
yeah. So there's definitely there's a basically a requirement now for people to consider non-dispute resolution and there's all different forms. I think the point you're probably alluding to is that there's been a big push, and I think maybe did I tell you about this?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think
I
so.
think you did.
I think I told you about this at coffee. But I think it's the one lawyer, one couple approach.
That was it. Yeah.
So it's one lawyer, one couple approach, and it is actually something we do. I haven't actually done the training yet on it because I've been off on maternity leave. But Anna Patterson in my team and Zhenya, who will be returning, have both done it. So it is actually something they offer, and the idea of it is that you can act for both clients. to try and reach an agreement without, and purposefully to try and take the contentious nature out of matters. Because what ends up happening is when you instruct a solicitor, naturally the other person, you become more defensive. It's like they're on their side, and it's just the natural way of things. But with hopefully this one lawyer, one couple approach, it will be it'll be a move in the right direction. But there are other alternatives. Mediation's a big alternative, and having solicitors present at mediation actually is quite a useful way of trying to reach an agreement. Arbitration is another option. So arbitration is, you would instruct an arbitrator who would then provide you with an award of what they think the outcome should be. But it just keeps you out of the court process.
Yeah.
And there's collaborative law. So that's something that you would have a solicitor, your partner would have a solicitor, and you would collaboratively try and reach an agreement on the outcome. But yeah, at the minute, the new thing on the block is one lawyer, one couple. So I think only time will tell if it will progress and develop and become the way people approach financial or resolving financial matters or child arrangements.
No, it's really interesting, and it will be interesting to see how that develops. That's been really great. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you personally and for Thrings as well. You've always been a really great supporter of the events that we run. You're sponsoring some events that are coming up soon. And
yes.
It's very much appreciated. So no, thank you very much.
No, thanks so much for having me.
Cool. And see you at an event soon.
Yes.